these days, news articles and headlines about climate change and its adverse effects on life as we know it potentially are becoming more and more common and harder to ignore. And today we're going to be discussing the impacts that we as a species are contributing to this climate change and ways that we can mitigate our impact on climate change. In particular, we're going to be discussing electricity production, energy production, and what we have, what that is doing to our climate, and what greenhouse gases it is emitting, as well as alternatives that we can put in place and try to move towards so as to mitigate our impact on our own climate. These are going to include solar, wind, hydroelectric, and nuclear energies. Now there are more sources that we can use. However, these are the major ones that are feasible to actually implement and put on the grid. So that's what we're going to be discussing. So let's start by framing our issue, framing the climate change issue. According to NASA, the increase in the average temperature is going to do things such as increase our wildfire seasons across the world, right? We've seen that in Canada and California. It's going to make hurricanes more intense and leads to droughts and other things that are just going to severely impact life on Earth. And while a lot of the issues that we're seeing are simply uncomfortable, right? They're making things less comfortable, such as like in New England, we have shorter and more mild winters. We have more heavy rains. We have more heat waves, right? These things are uncomfortable, but they can actually very seriously impact not only life, but also kind of the way that we live, right? So if we look at, for example, the lobsters in the Long Island Sound, according to climate.gov, right? Lobster catches from 1996 to 2014 have dropped over 96%, right? And this is because the rapid change in seawater temperature, only by a couple of degrees, have forced our lobster populations to move from Connecticut, and these areas more up to Maine, up to the Gulf of Maine, because the water temperatures down here are getting hotter, the water temperatures down there are still colder, so they're migrating up. And this can have an insane effect on the economies of especially seaside towns in New England, right? So these issues, these effects are not only on a grand scale, but they're also localized, and they're not just uncomfortable, they're very serious. So one area that we as humans really heavily contribute to the release of greenhouse gases that lead to this climate change is in our energy production. So according to the United Nations, generating electricity burned by fossil fuels is one of the leading causes, as far as humans are concerned, to climate change. And fossil fuel plants account for most of our energy infrastructure. So worldwide, they account for 34% of greenhouse gas emissions, again, according to the United Nations. And this translates to 20 gigatons of gases released globally as a result of this energy production by these fossil fuels. So, and since the effects of global warming are undeniable, since our contributions are undeniable, we need to do things to slow these trends. And again, one of the thing that we can do is address our energy production. So what we can do is we can look to more clean forms of electricity production that emit less CO2 as a result of the energy production. So again, like I stated in the beginning, we're going to be talking about solar, wind, hydroelectric, and nuclear, because as far as clean energy is concerned, they're kind of the front runners, especially solar and wind, because they're renewable energy sources, as well as hydro, but it's not quite as easily implemented as wind and solar. And again, wind and solar are kind of upfront because of their renewable aspect, and nuclear is also a big factor because it emits no CO2 as a result of the energy production itself. So let's look at these different forms of energy. So solar energy converts electricity into It converts sunlight into electricity by photoelectric cells. It's some scientific process wherein the radiation from the sun actually causes a differential voltage across an electronic component. Just for simplification, just to oversimplify how the technology works, and it stores the electricity in batteries. Wind turbines, giant fan blades. As the wind blows, it turns a turbine and it generates electricity, kind of similar to how a regular power plant does it, in the sense that it turns rotational motion into electricity. Hydroelectric, same thing, only instead of a wind turbine, instead of a fan that catches the air, it's a water wheel that generates rotational energy that converts to electricity. And nuclear power plants are not renewables like the other three. However, they generate electricity through the use of fissions of uranium atoms, which heats up water, which creates steam, which turns a turbine. And again, it's not renewable, but it is clean. It does not release CO2. So we've looked at kind of what they are. Let's look at the benefits and drawbacks. So the benefits of solar is that it uses sunlight. We're never going to lose our sun. If we lose our sun, we're not worrying about energy production. We're dead. So that resource is not going away. Okay, it's clean. It doesn't. The production of energy does not create CO2, so that cuts our emissions. And again, it's a renewable energy. We're not burning anything. We're not changing anything. We're not doing anything, and we don't have to mine any fuel. We have to mine the panels, but that's not fuel. Again, the drawbacks are the mining is terrible for the environment. You're taking up crazy minerals out of the ground, and then you're also having to clear massive swaths of land for these farms, as well as it actually kills birds that fly over it because it reflects the sunlight. Wind farms, they kind of dot the landscape, so they don't have the issue that solar has where they take up huge swaths of land. However, what they do is they also kill local bird populations that will be flying, and they'll hit the turbines will hit them. It's not good. And then something about both wind and solar, again, they have their benefits. They're both renewable. We're not losing either the sun or wind. However, the issue is that they're not as reliable as our fossil fuel plants, right? So if we look at Germany, and this was something from, sorry, let me look up the source. I have it here, but so according to Green Tech Media, right, Germany implemented almost entirely solar and wind for their energy infrastructure, and they had times of feast and famine. They had times where they generated too much electricity, because you obviously can't control your sun and your wind. So they generated too much energy, and they couldn't get rid of it fast enough, and they were losing money trying to sell it because they just had too much and they couldn't handle it, and they were going to start breaking equipment. And then they also had times where they couldn't generate enough, and we can't really have that. So hydroelectric is something that's incredibly consistent. We know exactly how much we're getting. The drawback to hydroelectric is that with hydroelectric, in order to build it, you have to dam or divert an entire waterfall. So they're very difficult to build. They're very expensive. So nuclear, again, the downside is that they are not renewable energy sources, right? We have to mine uranium, we have to create the fuel. The benefit to nuclear over all the other ones is that it generates more electricity and it's consistent. We can turn it on when we need it, we can turn it off when we don't need it, and it doesn't generate CO2. So in conclusion, right, I just want to say we've discussed the climate issue, we've discussed our alternatives, solar, wind, hydro, nuclear. We've discussed all of them, and they all have their benefits, and they're all going to be part of us moving away from fossil fuel plants. The front runner is probably going to need to be, of these alternative fuel sources, it's going to be nuclear. And the reason is because it's the consistency, it's the reliability, it creates enough electricity that we need. And what we're going to end up needing to do is we're going to need to use these other forms of electricity in order to kind of pull us more towards renewables, but our foundation needs to be set in something like nuclear that is just very consistent and very reliable, and something that we can plan for. So, you know, we've discussed the viability of these. We've discussed that they're all going to have to play a part in us moving away from fossil fuels. And, you know, at the end of the day, they're all going to help us reduce our carbon footprint. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening. And this was my speech on what we can do to help curb the effects of climate change and move towards zero carbon options. So thank you.